Welcome, everyone. Thank you for taking time today to join us for this program featuring a conversation with Dr. Jenna regarding the Dystonia Coalition. We're very excited to be bringing you this program. My name is Janet Heischutter. I serve as the Executive Director for the Dystonia Medical Research Foundation. I also serve as an administrative representative to the Coalition's Executive Committee and the Coalition's representative on the Coalition of Patient Advocacy Groups, quite a mouthful. Before we get started, I just have a couple of announcements to make sure things go smoothly. Everyone but our speakers tonight will be muted. We do that because of the number of participants and also just to reduce the background noise. But we want your questions. Your questions are a critical part of this program. So please use the question or the chat function to send us your questions, and we'll get to as many questions as we possibly can. We ask that you have your questions focus on the content of tonight's program, meaning the Dystonia Coalition. And again, we will do our best to get to as many questions as we possibly can at the end of the presentations. We are recording this program and we will send a link out to everybody who registered. So should you have any problems, technical problems, or your internet goes out, there will be a recording and you'll be able to watch the program. Speaking of technical difficulties, if you have any, you can contact Jody Roosevelt. Her email is listed here, and Jody will do her best to try to resolve those issues. But again, remember that this is being recorded, so not to worry. So on to our program. The Dystonia Coalition was approved in 2009 and became a part of the Rare Disease Clinical Research Network at that time. That program was really envisioned and really a leader at NIH in developing and fostering collaborative relationships between clinical investigators, folks at NIH, and patient advocacy groups. And tonight, we're going to do a deep dive into the work of the coalition. We're going to learn a little bit more about the important role patient organizations have played in the coalition, and then obviously talk about how the coalition is getting us ready for hopefully many new clinical trials. Our first speaker tonight is Kimberly Kuhlman. Kim serves as the Executive Director for the National Spasmodic Dystonia Association and is the Patient Advocacy Group Liaison to the Coalition and serves on the Executive Committee for the Coalition. Kim and I will moderate the questions at the end of Dr. Jenna's presentation. Dr. Jenna is a professor of neurology and human genetics at Emory University. Dr. Jenna is the principal investigator or the leader of the coalition. He received his bachelor's degree from Duke University and went west to receive his medical degree and his PhD from the University of California in San Diego. Dr. Jenna moved to the Johns Hopkins University, where he did some training and then went on the faculty there before moving to Emory in 2008. Dr. Jenna is widely recognized as one of the preeminent movement disorder neurologists in the world, and we're really fortunate to have his leadership with the coalition, his work every day, and his time and efforts today in presenting us information on the coalition. So just a quick reminder, again, we want your questions, so use the chat function and the Q&A function and send us your questions. And at this point, it's my pleasure to turn it over to Kim. And Kim, you're muted.
Thank you, Janet. I appreciate it. It's a pleasure to be with both of you tonight and with everyone who is attending. As Janet said, I serve as the Executive Director of the National Spasmodic Dystonia Association, but I also have a unique role with the Dystonia Coalition. When we started the coalition, we had designed a role called the Patient Advocacy Group Liaison, and I'm happy to be in that role and to partner with our patient advocacy groups. Here is a list of the current patient advocacy groups. You'll hear us mentioning the acronym PAGs a lot. And these are, we have had multiple PAGs over the years, and these are the current ones. We also have 4 groups that are listed on here that were part of the original application for the Dystonia Coalition. And we were happy to partner with the researchers to make this possible. And so we just want to give a very big thank you to all of our PAGs that are joining us tonight and who have supported the Dystonia Coalition over these many years. Some of the key areas of collaboration include organizational and administrative activities, such as Janet and I both serve on the executive committee. We participate in the bi-monthly phone calls. We send out email notifications and updates to our organizations and our community. We help promote the research grants, like the pilot project program and the career development awards, to our research community, and also help participate in programs like this. Another item that the PAGs do to collaborate is we help to co-fund projects. And Dr. Jenna will be talking more about these different individual projects, but this way the patient advocacy groups can help make the money and the funds go even further by helping to co-fund some of the grants for both the main clinical projects, the pilot project awards, which help to provide seed funding, career development awards to help facilitate junior faculty to start and develop careers, and also travel scholarships for junior investigators. We just concluded our 9th annual Dystonia Coalition meeting last week. It was a 2-day meeting, obviously virtual, but in the past, when we've been able to gather in person, this has been a wonderful program for both senior and investigators to meet and discuss research projects. Also, many of the PAGs have scientific representation on the grant review committees so that the patient advocacy groups are well aware of the research being conducted and supported. The Dystonia Medical Research Foundation plays a unique role in the Dystonia Coalition. This is a model that is unique only to us, and they serve as, this is the hierarchy of how the groups work, and you can see that they serve as an administrative unit for the coalition. In this role, the DMRF has a memorandum of understanding with the 40 plus different sites that are helping to conduct the research. They also support this by paying out all of the fees that are associated with the research. They manage the payments for both the PPP and the CDA grants. In addition, they also manage the community funds that the patient advocacy groups donate to help support the work of the coalition. And in addition, they also help support the administrative role, such as webinars like this and organizing meetings like we had last week. One of the most important things of this role is that the DMRF does not take any payment to do this role. And in fact, since they are not a university, they do not take indirect costs, which is a huge cost savings to the Dystonia Coalition. So much, in fact, that over these many years, it has helped to save over $1.6 million, which has then been able to go back into the programming of the Dystonia Coalition. And so I just want to thank Janet and the DMRF for this incredible role that they play. And it also frees up our researchers like Dr. Jenna and all of the ones that help support the coalition to focus on the research and not the administrative practice. Janet?
Thanks, Kim. We wanted to just highlight 2 programs where you all are the most important part of the research effort before we turn the program over to Dr. Jenna. The first is the Dystonia Brain Collective. Brain tissue and studying the brain tissue of persons who have been affected by dystonia is a really important part of the overall research efforts and may yield those missing pieces of the dystonia puzzle. So if your mother wanted you to go to Harvard, there's still time. We'd be happy to accept your brain many, many years from now when you're finished with it. There's no cost to your family. We have a person who is ready to help make arrangements. So we hope that you will consider becoming a brain donor. And if you're interested in the program, you can contact either Kim or myself, and we'd be happy to provide you with that information. The next program is the Global Dystonia Registry, or the GDR. This is a self-reported contact registry that's owned and operated by patient advocacy groups, designed to be ready when investigators want to survey or enroll people in a study or a trial. You can unenroll at any time. Over 6,100 people have registered already from 90 different countries, as you can see, mostly women. We hope that you will consider registering. The address is there. It's an important part of what you can do to help us advance research in dystonia. And again, if you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to either Kim or myself or any of the patient groups participating. We are in the process of updating the platform. So we'll have a new and improved GDR to offer people later this year. And at this point, I think it's really my pleasure to turn the program over to Dr. Jenna. We're looking forward to your presentation. Dr. Jenna.
Thank you, Janet. Thanks for that introduction, and thanks, Kim, for those introductory words too. Let me go ahead and share my screen here so we can get this presentation up. I'm very happy to be here with everyone tonight, and thanks to everyone for tuning in. I know there are lots of people on the line. I'm happy to tell you about this project really that has been near and dear to my heart for quite a long time now, called the Dystonia Coalition. And I think some of you probably know a little bit about it. Some of you may have participated in the studies already, and some of you may have not. So I'm just going to kind of give you a big picture overview of what we've been doing with this program. We are supported by the folks you see here, the Rare Disease Clinical Research Network, and this is funded through the NIH. The two institutes are called NCATS and NDS. And our goal really is down at the bottom here. It's to advance the pace of clinical and translational research in dystonia to find better treatments and a cure. And we want to focus on this part, find better treatments and a cure. So if we want to find new treatments, we kind of need to know what do we need? What do we need to get there? And I've listed a few big picture things that we kind of need to get to new treatments. One of them is cooperation. Another one is a good understanding of dystonia and the various subtypes. Another thing that we need is good tools to measure new treatments to know if they work or not. Of course, we need new approaches, new ideas for new treatments, and then we need the resources to do it. Now, what I'm going to do now is I'm going to walk through each of these ingredients and give you an idea of what the Dystonia Coalition has been trying to do to help fill these gaps so that we can get to new treatments. First, cooperation and collaboration. So when we first started this back in 2009, we had 8 academic centers in the United States willing to participate. And most of the other centers interested in dystonia, they didn't want to participate. They said, this will never work. It's not useful. We're not going to do it. Well, I'm happy to tell you that since 2009, we have grown to more than 40 centers. And you can see most of them are here in the US, few are in Canada. We have several in Europe, in the UK, France, Germany, Italy. We have sites even in India and even as far as Asia. And I think this tells you that people are interested in the mission of cooperation and collaboration. And it's really one of the first times we've ever had such a large scale engagement of people who are interested in studying dystonia. And all these people are now sort of working on the same team, hopefully, to reach the same goals. The other area that we've been very fortunate to have good cooperation, collaboration, and engagement with is our patient support groups. All of these patient support groups here have been very helpful to us in various ways. And I think Kim and Janet mentioned some of those briefly earlier, so I won't go into those further. But it's really nice to have these folks helping as well. So here's a complicated graph. We call this the Natural History Project. It's one of the main projects that the Dystonia Coalition has been doing to seek engagement of patients. And this has been organized by Joel Perlmutter, whose picture you see here. He's at the Washington University in St. Louis. And on this axis here, you see this is the number of participants with dystonia who have agreed to be in this project. And you can see the number here goes more than 3,000. So the line is crept up and up and up over the years. And we are now somewhere in 2021, and we're still going strong. So I think this is really nice because it shows how many people with dystonia are willing to participate in projects to help us demonstrate that we have good engagement of patients who are interested in new therapies as well. So I've covered briefly this issue of cooperation, that is collaboration among experts, and I sort of explained how we have lots of people now helping us. And of course, we now have engagement of people with dystonia, and we always need more. But let me go on next to this next one, which is also important for getting to new treatments, and that is a good understanding of dystonia. So many of you know that not everyone with dystonia is the same. There are different subtypes. Some of them progress over time, some of them do not. And of course, there are many different causes. So the Dystonia Coalition has spent a fair bit of time trying to understand dystonia and its many different manifestations. I showed you this figure earlier with the number of participants who signed up to be part of the Natural History Project. And I've taken Dr. Perlmutter's picture off so I can add this. And that shows the many different subtypes of dystonia here divided according to the body region that's affected that have been recruited. And what you can see is there are several different types. And even within these types, there are subtypes. So we have begun to look at different subtypes in different ways so that we can understand each type of dystonia much better than we have had in the past. Here is one example of those. This time, an example of cervical dystonia, and the leader of this project was Scott Norris. You can see all the people listed here who participated in this project, which was aimed at really understanding cervical dystonia and what makes it spread. So there were over 1,000 cases in this study, 1,477 who had cervical dystonia for an average of 15 years. And what we found out was about 20-ish% of them actually spread. And by that, we mean it started in their neck, but then it eventually spread to some other body region. And this really helps us to understand this problem better. When we look at those patients who spread, we can see what makes them different from those who didn't. Here's one of Scott Norris's picture. This is a picture of what happens when you have a problem with cervical dystonia in the neck, and those 22% of people who spread to other areas. And where did they spread to? They spread to the upper face, the lower face, the jaw, the larynx, the arm, hand, etc. So now we have a very good picture of where things may spread to. One of the other things you can see from this picture is that the artist who drew this is a much better scientist than he is an artist, because this is supposed to be the picture of a person with a head and an arm here. We're still working on Scott for that one. Here's another example. Again, I'm focusing just on cervical dystonia as an example. This was run by Mark Ledoux, who was at the University of Tennessee at the time. And he looked at genetic features in cervical dystonia and how they might differ from other cases of cervical dystonia. I'm not going to go into the details in that now, just to tell you that some people have a genetic cause and some don't. And this helps us understand that particular cause a little bit better. Here's another example of how we're trying to understand dystonia. For those people who don't have a genetic cause, then, well, what might it be? We don't really know, but there's a feeling that there might be something in the blood samples of people with cervical dystonia that might help us get a clue for what caused their problem. This is a study that was organized by Yan Sun here at Emory with me, and he did a study of all the biochemical features he could find in people with cervical dystonia using their blood samples. And he was able to identify certain problems in the blood that might be contributing to cervical dystonia in some cases. So these are just but a few examples. of how we're trying to get a better understanding of dystonia. We're trying to understand the different subtypes, how they progress over time, and particularly what causes them. And by getting a better understanding of the many different types of dystonia, we hope to be able to better tailor specific treatments to what they need better. All right, let me move next now onto tools to measure treatments. Obviously, if we think we have a new treatment, we have to prove that it works. And that means we need some type of way to measure if it's helping people or not. And those tools fall into three categories. One is a measurement tool that clinicians can use to determine if they can see a difference in a patient's dystonia. Another type of tool is something we give to people and we ask them to use it to tell us if their dystonia is better or worse. And then finally, they're what we call real objective measures. And by that, I mean, we're not asking the doctors, we're not asking the people, we're actually measuring their dystonia in some other way and trying to prove if it works or not. So let me give you some examples of what the Dystonia Coalition has been doing here to develop good measurement tools for new treatments. Here's one of the first examples. This is a measurement tool for clinicians. Again, I picked on cervical dystonia, and this study was led by Cindy Comella at Rush University in Chicago, and you can see the team of people that helped her with that. She helped revise and refine a clinical rating scale that helps clinicians measure the severity of dystonia and how it changes with treatment. Here's another example, this time organized by Sarah Perio-Richardson at the University of New Mexico. What she started out with was a simple study looking at all of the medications that people use across the world for dystonia. What were they using? And one of the surprising things that came out of this was people are using all different things. And that's probably because there's no one magic drug that really works. One of the favorites that we all like is botulinum toxin. Botox and related drugs are called botulinum toxins. And one of the surprising things that we discovered in Sarah's study was only 60% of people were using it. Now, the doctors think this is a bit of a miracle drug, and so we were a little bit surprised why so many people were actually not using it. And we don't quite understand why they're not using it, but one of the main reasons they're not using it is because of its effects over time. So here is a complicated graph. There are 4 panels, but let me start with this one here. This one shows how much it improves people, and then this shows the time. And typically we give this medication at 3-month intervals. So at 3 months, then you come back at 6 months, and then you come back at 9 months. And once you give the treatment initially, you get better, and then it wears off and you start getting worse. And by 3 months, you're ready for a new treatment, and you get it, and then you get better, and then you get worse again. And then you need another treatment, and then you get better, and you get worse again. And you keep going on like this forever. And one of my patients one day came to me and told me she felt like a human yo-yo because of these ups and downs. And so we started calling this the yo-yo effect. Now, this panel here shows what we really like to see, what we think is the best therapeutic response, but we all know it doesn't work so perfectly sometimes. So some people have what we call short responses. That is, they don't quite get to 3 months, and they have this gap where their symptoms come back and they're not really very well treated and they don't feel very good. So for them, the yo-yo effect is not very pleasant. We also have examples like this where people come in for their botulinum toxin every 3 months, but one of the treatments doesn't work for some reason. Maybe they had a bad day, or the treatment session wasn't exactly the same, or the treatment pattern was changed or whatever. Anyway, it doesn't work and they have to wait till 6 months till they get another treatment. And then finally, we also see patients who do this. That is, they get their treatments over time, but each time they get it, it just seems to be less and less effective. So these are some of the examples for why patients who use botulinum toxin may not be as enthusiastic about it as we might expect. Right now, it's one of the best medications we have for patients with all types of dystonia, but I think we can do better. And Sarah's study pointed out that we can do better by showing how many people are actually not using it. And so this is one of the things that inspired us to do a study that we are organizing through the Dystonia Coalition, where we try to measure these effects in people. So we all know this happens, but we don't actually have any information to provide to regulatory agencies like the FDA to say, hey, we need something better. Look at all these patterns that are happening. These are kind of theoretical graphs. We know they happen, but Sarah's going to get the data from people to prove this. And what she's going to do is she's going to develop a simple app that goes on a cell phone, a smartphone, or maybe a computer. And every week, people are going to go in and answer some simple questions about how they're feeling that day. And with that app, we'll be able to chart how things happen over time like this. And hopefully that will give us the information that the patients have been telling us for years, but we don't really actually have any data on. All right. I also mentioned objective measurement tools. That is, instead of asking the patients how they're feeling or the doctors what they think they see, can we develop like computerized methods or other digital tools to actually get real hard measurements? This is a study that was organized by David Peterson at the University of California in San Diego. And he showed that he could use computer vision and apply it to videos of patients with blepharospasm, and the computer could tell us how severe their problem was. And this is really cool because it provides a new method that we can use just based on a simple video to measure how people are doing, even when they don't come into the clinic. We can get a quick video, we can have it sent to our center, we can have it analyzed using this system, and then we can know how bad it is. So if we do a clinical trial, for example, patients don't have to come in every week to get evaluated. We can actually use this computer vision software. All right, so this is one of the reasons that we've spent so much time developing tools to measure new treatments, because when we have new treatments, we really have to be sure that they work, and we want to know that they work from the clinical perspective, from the doctor, from the patients, and we want to have objective measures. And so we've spent a fair bit of time getting measurement tools for all types of dystonia. All right, the fourth area of need for the establishment of new treatment is new approaches. That is, we need new ideas for new treatments. And of course, we need new experts to help study dystonia and bring those new treatments to us. So what has the Dystonia Coalition been doing in this realm of getting to new things? One of the things we've been doing is funding what we call seed projects. We provide a little bit of money for ideas that people might have to learn more about dystonia or develop new treatments. And we provide that to any investigator anywhere in the world. And here's a big long list of some of the studies that we have funded since 2009. And I'm not going to review this list in detail. There's too much text here, but you can see some of them relate to genetics. Some of them relate to facial recognition software, like I just talked to you about earlier. Some of them relate to studies of actual brain specimens. Some of them relate to imaging studies and all manner of things. So the other thing I'd like to point out is we don't limit our reach to American investigators. If there are investigators in other parts of the world who have good ideas, we fund them too. So here you can see there's one from Italy, the United Kingdom, France, Germany, and so on. So we will take good ideas no matter where they come from. And we believe this is important because this is where we get new ideas for new treatments. The other thing we have done is we've been trying to help new investigators get a foothold in dystonia. And this is very important to bring new thoughts and younger investigators into the field. So we always have a new group of people working on it. So we also give a small amount of money for what we call a career development award for relatively new investigators in the area of dystonia. Again, this is a long list starting in 2009. You can see the names of the people who got them, where they were here. And once again, we're not limiting ourselves to Americans. So we provide funds to good people in Canada, in Italy, Israel, you name it, wherever they come from. If we get a good candidate, we're willing to fund them so that we have a a good cadre of new people coming along with new ideas to help find new treatments and cures. So what are the new treatments? Is there anything new coming? And the answer is yes. So let me give you a very, very brief overview of what we know so far. So some of you may know that there are new botulinum toxins coming, including some that may last longer than 3 months. So these are being tested now, and some of the Dystonia Coalition investigators are participating in these studies. So we hope to have new information about some new botulinum toxins very soon. But what about oral medications? How about something we don't have to inject? And the answer is yes, there are new things coming here too. Here's a list of 3 different medications or drugs that have been of great interest and have begun to be studied. So the first one is called Parampanel, and this is a study that was organized by Susan Fox in Canada with some Dystonia Coalition investigators to study this drug here because of the possibility that it could help people with cervical dystonia. And this was a very pilot and preliminary study, which helped us learn a lot about how to do new clinical trials with the new drug, because we haven't actually done this in many, many years. And this was a very successful study that Susan conducted. And what we learned was it did seem to help in some regards, but the side effects were not so great. And so maybe this is a drug that we might not want to pursue in other people, because if the side effects are not tolerable, then most people won't want to take it. So this is one of the reasons we test these kinds of drugs in smaller groups of patients. I think there were 20-some patients in this study to see if there's a hint that they'll work, and then we test them in bigger groups of patients later. Here's another drug. It's called Diplagurant, and this is a drug that's being put forward by a company called Advocacy, and they have announced their interest in trying it in patients with dystonia as well, this time focusing on blepharospasm. Here's the medication over here. I don't have many details to give you about this trial because it was really just announced a couple of months ago, but they hope to be started before the end of this year, and we should know something more about this drug very soon. And if it works in this group of patients, small group of patients with blepharospasm, it's very likely that they're going to want to try it in other patients with dystonia too. But they have to start somewhere, and they elected to start with blepharospasm. Finally, there's this complicated area we call M4 Selective Anti-Cholinergics. These are medications that work on a specific neurotransmitter receptor in the brain. I won't go into the details too much, but let me just say that there's been a lot of interest in this particular receptor, and there are many investigators and some companies looking at the development of these drugs for patients with dystonia as well. Stay tuned. I think we'll hear much more about this in the very near future. So the answer to this questions, are new treatments coming? They absolutely are. Some of them are being tested now. You may have heard about some of these, and you may not have heard about some of the others, but there are actually more on the list that I could tell you about some other time. All right, so we've covered cooperation, good understanding dystonia, measurement tools, and various new things coming down the pipe. How about resources to do it? Well, of course, you can't develop new treatments without proper resources. And this is one of the areas that has been very important to the Dystonia Coalition. We've been very fortunate to get money from the NIH to do what we've been able to do since 2009. We have been very fortunate to get funding from the patient advocacy groups that Kim and Janet mentioned earlier, so that we can keep on the road towards this mission. I think this is a very important program, and we need your help to keep it going. So more information about this program is actually written out in an article here that's a review article. It's what's called a public access article, so anybody can look at it. And you're welcome to look at it and read more details. It was put together by my study coordinator here at Emory, Gamza Kilik-Berkman. So what can you do? I mentioned that we need resources to keep the effort going, and Kim and Janet mentioned to you some of the things that we need to help keep the research mission going, the Global Dystonia Patient Registry, the Brain Bank. Here are some of my ideas about what you can do to help. So one of them, of course, is participate in clinical studies like some of the ones I mentioned to you. Obviously, researchers can't learn about dystonia without having patients who have it. So we can't really learn about your disorder unless you help us. Now we recognize that not everyone can participate in clinical trials like the ones I've described. Some people live very far away from the centers who are doing it. And so it's not necessary for everyone to participate in every trial, but if you have an opportunity, at least consider it. If you have the time and energy to do it, the investigators could certainly use your help. And it's not just for Dystonia Coalition studies. I would say any good dystonia study that comes along can help us learn something. We already talked briefly about the Global Dystonia Patient Registry. So if there is a study in your area, occasionally we use this registry to reach out to patients and inform them about it. And then they can learn about whether or not they want to participate in the study in their area. So these are some of the things that you can do about clinical studies. The other thing that I think is very important for all of you to do is help get the word out. Specifically, help educate others about dystonia. The more people who know about this problem, the better off we are. Hiding it doesn't help us. I think we need to make sure people know about it, and especially that they need to know how difficult it is to live with and that we need new treatments. And specifically, I think it's a good idea for everyone who's treated with botulinum toxin ever to get the word out that this is not enough. It's our best treatment right now, and boy, we'd be lost without it. I use it all the time. My patients love it, but we all know it's not a miracle drug and that we can do better. So if we want to do better, we need to get the word out that we need additional things along the way. And then finally, advocate. We need your help. We need your voice to advocate for more resources. And you can do this by advocating at the National Institutes of Health, the Department of Defense. And to make this easier, the patient advocacy groups that we have been working with have an advocacy group that helps work with these people at NIH and government and Department of Defense to convince them that our cause is important. So if you hear about that, by all means, get involved, because this is important. The more our political leaders hear that this is an important problem, the more likely it is that they are to stand up and listen and to provide the resources that we all know we need to get the job done. So I believe that's my last slide, and I want to thank all of you for joining. I know I probably covered a lot very quickly, but there was that little article. If anybody's really interested in learning more, it's a little bit technical, but I think it's written in a way that most people can understand, and I think you could have a look at it if you want to learn more. And of course, if you have questions or comments, I think now is the time.
Great, thank you, Dr. Jenna. That was really terrific, and it's nice to end with this wonderful slide expressing appreciation for everybody. I just want to give a shout out to everyone who participated in the focus groups with Dr. Purio Richardson's group. We really appreciated everyone's involvement in that. So as with all of the studies, we can't do this, as Dr. Jenna said, without you. So I'm going to combine a couple of questions for this first one to kick us off. People are interested in participating, which is great news. So how would somebody participate in some of the studies being conducted by the coalition? And then do they have to be seen at one of the participating sites? And I'll throw in there, someone asked about whether or not they're a neurologist can still join the coalition. A multi-part question for you.
Good question. We have many centers across the US and even in other parts of the world, but those centers are not everywhere. And so it is difficult for some patients to reach those centers because they're far away or they're not seen at those centers. You do have to be seen at one of the Dystonia Coalition centers, but we do take new neurologists on a rolling basis. If there's a neurologist somewhere who really wants to participate, we're happy to have them involved. We want expert neurologists. So we want neurologists. Actually, we want otolaryngologists and speech language pathologists and physical rehab. Doesn't have to be a neurologist, but we want them to be expert. We want them to really know what they're doing so that they can be a strong team on our player, a strong player on our team. And so not everyone not all the docs can do it. Not all of them have time. And honestly, we don't pay them a whole lot for what they do. So they have to really want to do it.
Right. And I would just add to that, that even if you're not in an area where there is a site and it's convenient for you to participate, as you said, there are ways to participate in the, through the Global Dystonia Registry, and planning on becoming a brain donor too, which is really important. So, Kim, do you have a question for Dr. Jenna?
It goes back to your talk about the natural history study, and again, kind of combining questions here. When you say average length, does that mean the person was cured or healed, or is this condition for life? And then kind of complementing that is, for dystonia that spreads, again, how does it conclude? Does it stop spreading at some point or cause complications that end up being fatal?
Great question. So most of the textbooks that we read that were written many, many years ago, they say that dystonia gets worse over a period of time, usually 3 months or 6 months or maybe a year or two, and then it stabilizes and it stays that way forever. That's what the textbooks say. But one of the things we learned in the Dystonia Coalition natural history study is not every person follows that textbook pattern. Some patients get worse for a period of time, and then they get better and the problem goes away, and we don't know why. We want to study those people because it might help us understand why they got better. Other people, they get worse over a certain period of time, and then they keep getting worse and they keep getting worse. But usually after 3 years, 4 years, or 5 years, if you've had it for that long, it doesn't keep getting worse after that. Most people don't continue to get worse and worse and worse over the years and end up in wheelchairs and die. That doesn't usually happen. It's not a progressive neurodegenerative disorder in most people. Now, can I say that's true for everyone? No. Everyone's different, and there are always a handful of people who don't follow what the textbooks tell us you're supposed to do, and they may get worse over time. But fortunately, it's not very many.
Janet?
Sure. So we had a quick question that I can answer, which is about what does the DoD have to do with dystonia research? And the Department of Defense has a medical research program that's actually fairly robustly funded, and dystonia advocates have been working to get dystonia on the list. So it's important because it's another bucket of funding for us to tap into and support researchers like Dr. Jenna and others. So if you're interested in learning more about becoming a dystonia advocate, please feel free to reach out to either Kim or myself, and we'll be happy to give you that information. I have a sort of a fundamental question though, Dr. Jenna, sort of goes along with the question that Kim had for you. Can you just explain what a natural history study is?
Yeah, a natural history study is kind of a weird name for trying to understand what happens over time. So when you begin with a problem, what happens to you over time? Does it get worse? Does it get better? And so a natural history study is a way to describe collecting patients' information from the start and then just figuring out what happens to them over time. And it's a little bit surprising that we don't have a whole lot of good information on that, but we do now, particularly for some subtypes. And we're changing a little bit what the textbooks say, that it's kind of gets worse over 3 months or 3 years and then it stabilizes. That's not always true. So a natural history study is very important to tell us what really happens to different people in the world so that we can more accurately tell people what to expect in their lives.
Great, thank you. Kim.
And can we follow up a little bit about that? There's a question regarding how often do people experience remission in their dystonia with a long-term, lasting long or short-term?
Good question. So if you get dystonia, how many people get better? They go into remission and it doesn't come back. That number is around 5%, maybe 10%. We are very interested in those people because we would love to know what makes them different and what makes them get better. We don't know what that is yet, but that 5% or 10% of people, even though it's a relatively small proportion, becomes very important for the research community to understand. So it's not common, but it does occur. And then, of course, if you're in that 5 or 10% lucky club that gets better, there is always the risk it comes back. So it turns out that about half of those people who get better then eventually comes back. And it might come back months later, and sometimes it comes back years later.
So a question, I think that probably relates to the patient-reported outcomes app, or the thing, patients telling about what happened, the benefit that Dr. Pirio Richardson working on, around the issue of rubbing the injection site. There's some people say don't do it, others say no, it's good to do it. So we have a question about that, whether or not this will capture that information. And then I would just add to that also, will that study also capture people who participate with or work with a physical therapist? Is the coalition really interested in the benefits of things like physical therapy and maybe even homeopathic remedies?
Right. So physical therapy is an easier one to address. And the answer is yes, it is important. One of the Career Development Award people and one of the pilot projects was related, in fact, to the role of physical therapy in dystonia. We think it's a very important avenue of treatment that's probably underutilized, and we need to understand why. The reason it's underutilized is a lot of insurance companies won't pay for it because nobody has ever proved that it works. In other words, they haven't used the measurement tools I talked about to show to insurance companies that physical therapy makes a difference. And so we need more studies in that area. But I am certainly an advocate of physical therapy and certainly offer it to patients who come to me and ask for it. Now, the other question, remind me the other part of the question.
Yeah, so what about, on some of the forums and stuff, there are controversy about whether or not you should rub the injection site. Yeah. Some people say absolutely not. Others say, no, you should, it helps the spread. Is the coalition looking into that? Is it interested in that?
We are interested in everything, but we only have a certain number of investigators and resources. And so what we do is we get together with our patients and patient advocacy groups, and we try to determine what are the most important things to do first. And then we focus on those. I think the issue of whether or not you rub the site is very important. I think the issue of whether or not you exercise the site. So I've heard people say that after you get your injections, you should work those muscles to help get the medicine in them. And some doctors recommend it, some don't. Some patients like it, some don't. I would have to say we just don't have enough information about it. It's probably not harmful to do those things, but we don't have really good proof that it helps because they haven't been methodically studied. And those are the kinds of things that are easy to study. It's just a matter of bandwidth and whether we have the time and people and resources to actually organize the study to give us an answer that is really definitive.
So there's a few questions regarding causes of dystonia. And so one person was asking about the blood collection that's part of the natural history study and kind of what the purpose of that is. And then also besides genetics, is there any data on other causes of dystonia, especially focal dystonias?
Yes, another good question. So when we collect a blood sample, it's used for a variety of different things. The most important thing is it's divided into different tubes and it's stored. It's stored in a deep freezer so that we can test it later. And if somebody comes up with a really great idea tomorrow, we have a bank of freezers full of the stuff that we can use to test it, and we don't have to start all over again. So when we bank blood samples, it becomes very valuable for the future. That bank has already been very valuable for looking at genetics. And it continues to be very valuable. We continue to look for new genes and how old genes might be affecting people. And more recently, we began to look for things other than genes. So some of our investigators have begun to look at the immune system and how it may be responding in dystonia. Other people have been looking at metabolic conditions like nutritional things. So the blood can be used for all of these things, and that's one of the reasons that we collect it from everyone and why we store it. Because once we have it, we don't have to keep collecting it from the same person for every little study. We just take one of our little tubes out and we say, here, try this.
So along those lines, are the studies, either the natural history study or the biorepository, are these giving us insights into a relationship between Parkinson's disease possibly and dystonia?
Wow, that's a big question. So it's a complicated one. So for the most part, we tell people with dystonia that they're not going to evolve into some other worse disorder like Parkinson's disease. Dystonia is dystonia, Parkinson's disease, and they're really not the same. So people with dystonia shouldn't all begin to worry that they're going to get Parkinson's disease in the near future. Having said that, I can tell you that some of the biological processes that are going wrong in dystonia are somewhat similar to those that we've seen in Parkinson's disease. It's just that they don't evolve so quickly, and they don't seem to be associated with neurodegeneration of neurons like we see in Parkinson's disease. So we are very interested in this relationship. We know there is some type of relationship, but we don't really quite understand it yet. And that is indeed one of the other things we do with these blood samples, is it can help us understand that relationship a little bit better.
There's a question regarding the whole structure of the Dystonia Coalition. And the question is regarding, are we patterning this research after other diseases? And I thought this might be a good opportunity to even kind of address the whole program that the Dystonia Coalition is a part of, that we're just not the only coalition, but there's multiple coalitions looking at rare diseases.
Yeah, that's a great question too, Kim. So I think the questioner is absolutely correct. When we do research in dystonia, we don't want to reinvent the wheel and figure it all out on our own. What we need to do is we need to copy what has been successful in other disorders. And in fact, that's exactly what we do. We call ourselves the Dystonia Coalition since we focus on dystonia. But in fact, we're part of a much bigger NIH program called the Rare Diseases Clinical Research Network. And there are 20 or so coalitions in that network. Each of those coalitions is studying a different kind of group of rare disorders. So we study dystonia, some of them study kidney disorders, some of them study lung disorders, some of them study heart disorders. And so what we do as a group is twice a year we get together and we look at what each other group is doing, and we sort of copy what works, and we avoid what doesn't work. And so it's not that the Dystonia Coalition is figuring this out all on its own. We actually have a lot of help, and we learn from other disorders in a way that I think is very important.
A question about whether or not the coalition is, oh, there you are.
Yeah, the sun has been going down here and I've got this big window, but I just realized, oh my goodness, it's getting dark. I can't even see.
No, the light is on you now. We have a question about whether or not the coalition is looking into functional dystonias, and maybe you give a brief overview of what a functional dystonia is.
Yeah. So functional dystonia, some people call it psychogenic dystonia, is a disorder that looks like dystonia, but has a different cause. It is motivated more by issues related to psychology and psychiatry. And since we think the cause is very different from most patients with dystonia, we decided we were not going to study functional dystonia as part of our plan. There are actually more than 100 different subtypes of dystonia, 100 different causes. And obviously we can't study all of them. So what we elected to do was to pick the most common of those and start with those first. And as we learn more and more, about those, we may be able to apply what we learned to other disorders. But at the moment, functional dystonia is not something that's on our list of things that we target.
Okay, thank you. Kim?
Regarding Mage syndrome, is it considered a multifocal dystonia, and how does it fit into the spectrum of dystonia?
Yeah, good question. So Mage syndrome is one of the subtypes of dystonia. It's a syndrome that involves dystonia of the eye region, but also the mouth and jaw region, and sometimes the neck as well. So because all of these regions are connected to each other, we call it segmental dystonia. But it is one of the subtypes, and in fact, it's one of the more common subtypes. It's probably second only to cervical dystonia.
Dr. Jenner, have any of the studies that have, the coalition has supported demonstrated any or provided any insights between the dystonias and ethnicities?
Yeah, so what we know so far is that dystonia seems to affect all races, all ethnicities, nobody spared. Some ethnic groups, some areas in some areas of the world are far more affected than others. And in many of those cases, there's a genetic cause. So yes, it does vary a little bit across the world, but no area is spared. Perhaps the biggest subgroup of people, if you will, that we have been able to identify with dystonia is girls and women. So what we know is 2/3 of people with dystonia are female. And we don't quite understand why that's the case, but it provides us with another a clue, another biological clue that we can begin to dissect to try and figure out what might be the cause of it.
Another question, a few questions actually came up about deep brain stimulation and as a treatment for dystonia, and is that part of the coalition's work right now?
Yeah, another good question. So deep brain stimulation surgery, for those of you who don't know about it, is a brain surgery that can be used for people who have very severe dystonia that doesn't respond to other things. I didn't mention it, but it's a very well-known therapy that's usually applied to a very small number of people, I think, who go for that. We do recruit people with DBS surgery to the Dystonia Coalition in the natural history study. So that we can study them before and after, and we do collect blood samples from them so that we can help understand their condition as well. So absolutely, yes, those people are welcome and encouraged to participate in these studies.
How about people who have had other surgeries for the different forms of dystonia? Can they participate also?
Yep, anybody who has had any surgery really for anything can participate. Not so many people have these surgeries nowadays since the botulinum toxins are more popular. But people with blepharospasm go for eyelid surgeries or other things. And there are sometimes laryngeal surgeries that are done for spasmodic dysphonia. All of those people are welcome.
Great, thank you.
And does the coalition look into dystonias that are caused after a stroke or cerebral palsy?
Good question again. So there are many different causes of dystonia, and you can get dystonia from a stroke, you can get it from cerebral palsy, you can get it from a genetic disorder. We study, in our group, we study what's called isolated or primary dystonia, that is dystonia pure, without other problems. Like I said before, there are more than 100 different subtypes, and we couldn't study all of them together all at once. So we elected to pick what we thought were the most common ones and start with them. Hopefully in the future, we can begin to include other subtypes too, and that what we learn from the primary dystonia patients will be applicable to other dystonias too. But right now, we're not particularly focusing on people who have dystonia from cerebral palsy or from stroke or from some other brain trauma like that.
Thank you. Kim?
What is the relationship, if we know, between dystonia and essential tremor?
Oh, another really good question. A particular interest of mine in fact, So what we know is that about 50% of people with dystonia also have a tremor. And that tremor often looks a lot like essential tremor. I personally believe that there are two disorders that frequently co-occur together. And on the other hand, we have lots of people who start with essential tremor, and over the years they get dystonia. So we know that these two disorders are very closely linked, and we don't know why. But many Dystonia Coalition investigators like myself, we pay a lot of attention to the studies going on in essential tremor because we think they're probably going to help us learn something about dystonia too.
We have a question about brain donation, and person's asking how they can make those arrangements. And I'll just say that I think when we send out the link for the recording of tonight's program, we'll send the link for enrolling as a brain donor, and also for those of you who want to pursue maybe registering at the Global Dystonia Registry as well, just to make it convenient for everyone. So thank you for that question. Kim, maybe one last question.
Sure. I think this is probably, might not be directly related to the coalition's work, but I think one that a lot of people ask, and that's the relationship between stress and dystonia.
Yeah, very important question. I get this a lot. So it's pretty clear to me and to many doctors and to many patients that stress makes dystonia worse. So if you have dystonia and you're under stress, it just gets worse. That doesn't mean that stress causes dystonia. So you can't get dystonia just because you've had a lot of stress. Some people think that happens, but more likely what has happened is that they had a very, very, very mild case of dystonia. And then when they experienced a period of bad stress, it became more obvious. And so it looks like a cause. But we typically think of those two things as two separate things who can sometimes sort of gang up together and make your life worse when they're combined.
Thank you.
This has been great. I just want to say thank you to everybody for your fabulous questions. And Dr. Jenna, thank you so much for the presentation and the information responding to the questions. And again, for the work that you do every day to get us closer to our shared goal of new treatments and ultimately a cure. And just want to also thank Kim for all of her work in support of the coalition. And finally, Jody Roosevelt for her technical support tonight's program. So thank you, everyone. Again, we'll send out the link. It'll take us a couple of days to just sort of clean up the file, but then we'll get it out to you along with that information about the brain program, the brain donation program, and the Global Dystonia Registry. So thank you again very much. Good night.
Thanks, everyone.